contradictions, and Iran. Is the drumbeat towards war now inevitable? As the chattering classes discuss the possible date of an Israeli attack on Iran, the U.S. military and intelligence community says Iran is not developing nuclear weapons and has not demonstrated any intention to do so. Is this rapidly turning into another dumb war of choice? To crosstalk the complex situation surrounding Iran, I'm joined by Patrick Clawson in Montreal. He is the Director for Research at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and Senior Editor of Middle East Quarterly. And in Washington, we have Gawdat Bahgat. He is a Professor of Political Science at the National Defense University. And in Brussels, we cross to Gilbert Doctorow. He's an independent scholar and author of Great Post-Cold War American Thinkers on International Relations. All right, gentlemen, this is Crosstalk. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Gilbert, if I can go to you first in Brussels, can you explain something to me? The American military establishment and intelligence community says Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon, has no intention of doing it, and then you changed, or the same page on the Washington Post and New York Times, everyone's discussing when the attack is going to happen. What is going on? This seems to be an amazingly paradoxical situation.
Well, I don't have a direct answer to that question, but yes, there is a lot of crosstalk within the United States and within the foreign policy community, so I'm not particularly surprised that personalities or interests within the Pentagon would be inconsistent in their public position now with the positions of the foreign policy analysts who have taken all the airtime till now.
All right. Okay, Patrick, if I can go to you, can you resolve this? Can you square the circle for me?
Certainly. It took the United States several years to get the material to make a nuclear weapon. To actually make the nuclear weapon took the United States only a few weeks. Some indications are it only took the United States a week. Actually making the bomb is the easy part. The hard part is getting the material with which to make the bomb. And Iran has spent billions of dollars and 20 years now getting the material to actually make a bomb. So we don't want to wait until that last week before we say, there's a problem here.
But if we have the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, says in front of Congress that there is no evidence that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. That's the head of national intelligence.
It takes a few weeks to build a nuclear. It takes a few weeks to build a nuclear weapon. They don't have to make that decision until the last minute. They have, however, spent billions of dollars building huge facilities with which to make the materials that will let them make that decision when they want to make it. They haven't done it yet, but what they have done is violated their safeguard agreements with the IAEA.
Okay, Gawdat, you want to jump in there? Go right ahead.
If I may, yes, I believe there is no way to judge any country by intention. There is no way to know what anybody's intentions are. We have to judge based on facts, not intentions. The facts, as they have been stated by the IAEA, that till now Iran has not violated its obligations to the non-proliferation treaty NPT.
Last IAEA report set out 20 pages of violations by Iran. That's the reason why the IAEA board has repeatedly censored Iran. That's the reason the Security Council has repeatedly voted for sanctions on Iran, is to say that Iran has to demonstrate its purely peaceful intentions. That's the wording in the Security Council resolution.
The report by the IAEA, the report by...
Go ahead, Gawdat, go ahead.
The report by the IAEA did not and has not said that Iran is making the bomb. The IAEA said Iran is not cooperating enough.
You said it didn't say it had violations. It has many violations. The question of violations is not making the bomb. The question of violations is its safeguards agreement. The whole point of the IAEA procedures is you can do dangerous things only if you are completely transparent and open. And Iran has not been.
Well, Iran's nuclear. If I go back to Gilbert, in Brussels, Iran's nuclear program is the most inspected program in the history of the IAEA. What do you think about all of this here, Gilbert? If I can stay with you in Brussels, I mean, there's a drumbeat to war, irrespective of what the IAEA has to say about anything, because most people said the last report was just a recycled one of the one before. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think this is off the mark. The issue has moved on. The issue of relations with Iran has moved on considerably from the strict starting point of its nuclear ambitions. And now what were side issues have become the central issue. That is the economic warfare being entered into against Iran. The ratcheting up of sanctions, which at a certain point the quantitative element becomes a qualitatively different relationship and becomes an existential threat to Iran. We're approaching that point, and the issue of its nuclear ambitions or what has been proven has fallen into a subsidiary position. I could see that coming out in a dispute between the Pentagon and the Department of Defense and the State Department, because there is a significantly more restrained Pentagon under present leadership and under Panetta, as opposed to the very hawkish position of the State Department and the foreign policy community supporting the State Department.
Okay, Patrick, if I can go to you, it seems to me that Israel and Iran are already at war. We're just ratcheting it up, okay? Yes. There's plenty of other, the civilians are being killed, scientists are being killed, diplomats are being attacked. I mean, we're going down this path right here, and it seems like there's, neither side really wants to step back from the brink here, except for maybe Obama doesn't know what to do, but certainly a lot of other people seem to have already decided that they want to continue down this path where we have a major blowout of one form or another, hopefully not all-out war, because the regional implications would be immense, and there are a lot of American interests in the region.
Well, indeed, as your guest from Brussels was explaining, the United States and the European Union and its allies have launching what is in effect an economic war against Iran, saying to the Iranian leadership, look, you can either have your nuclear weapon or you can stay in power. You get to choose. And the Iranian leadership has to decide. They can either keep their nuclear weapon or they can stay in power. That's the choice that's before them. And they have to make that choice. And we will see this year which of those two they choose.
You're kind of jumping ahead here. Again, I keep stressing here that there's no one has proven that Iran has intentions even to build a nuclear weapon. I mean, I'm open to, evidence here. Gawdat, let's go to Gawdat here, because, I mean, it seems to me you're kind of railroading us down a certain path here. Let's keep an open mind here.
No, look, the Security Council is
Gawdat, if I could go to you in Washington here. Do you see that, I mean, there is this drive to war. I mean, if evidence doesn't fit, they just throw it out, because war is the worst possible thing that can happen here.
And this rush to war, if the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan taught us anything, it is that it is much easier to start war than ending it. And as you said, it is true that there is low-level war going on between Iran and Israel, and United States, President Obama, for his credit, he led the international community to impose the toughest sanctions on Iran. It needs some time to see how it will work. Okay. And there is it is very irrational to talk about war. War will devastate everybody, will be very bad, not only to Iran, not only to the Middle East, to the whole world. Oil prices are very high now because of this.
Okay, Gilbert, if I can go to you, I think Patrick kind of put it really out there very openly. It's all about regime change. That's what this is about. It's not about the nuclear program. That the United States and its allies, particularly Israel, want a regime change there. For some reason, they think it'll be a better outcome then. No, I mean
say that.
Change the regime.
Either you get the regime or the nuclear weapon. You have a choice.
Well,
either regime change or nuclear weapon.
Gilbert,
you get to choose.
I guess we don't have. Well, some people have sovereignty, some don't. Gilbert, what do you think about this?
Well, you summed it up in the last sentence. The word rational came up here, and I'd just like to put it into a context as to who is behaving more rationally in the sense of looking after their own interests. Yes, America has interests in the Middle East, and I think an attack on Iran would jeopardize those interests. So is America acting rationally by its very aggressive position vis-a-vis Iran today? On the other hand, we often are persuaded that the Iranian leadership is irrational. And I am not persuaded of that. I believe that they are rational and they are looking after their interests, and they could be only suicidal if, in the context of the American positioning of troops in Israel today, they were to take any action that was an essential threat to Israel. I believe the moderator has been a bit coy with respect to the Iranian intentions of building a nuclear device. Let's assume that they do.
Okay.
They would be rather strange people in the context of what we've seen in Iraq and in Libya.
I would absolutely agree with you, okay? Because if you're being threatened, that's what you're going to do, is to try to protect yourself. Patrick, if I can go to you, I mean, the element of rationality here, I mean, who's being rational and who's being irrational?
Well, the Russian government, like the American government, the French government, and the governments of the other countries in the Security Council, are being very rational. They are saying that the threat of proliferation of nuclear weapons and of a nuclear arms race is such that we have to reinforce the Non-Proliferation Treaty and its provisions, which say that countries have to be fully transparent to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And when countries aren't fully transparent to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Security Council says to that country, suspend your activities until you can reassure us your purely peaceful intentions. We're not going to wait to the last minute. We're going to reinforce the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, by saying that IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards, have to be followed. That's what the international community has said. Rational position, worry about a nuclear arms race throughout the Middle East and indeed throughout the world if countries can ignore
Okay,
their
I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and
IAEA.
after a short break, we'll continue our discussion on calls to war. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about whether there will be a strike against Iran. Okay, Gawdat, I'd like to go back to you in Washington. You know, before I went into television and journalism, I was an academic historian and of modern European history. And I can remember reading, because I wasn't alive at the time, but the hysteria that the United States had about the Soviet Union acquiring a nuclear weapon. I remember the hysteria of the United States when China was acquiring a nuclear weapon. And you know what? They've never gone to war with each other. Deterrence works, okay? So again, I'll agree with Gilbert. What if, you know, Iran were to acquire a nuclear weapon? It's certainly being threatened by the West right now. Would it use it?
I'm very glad you raised this point, because I believe it is very racist to say that only Western powers can decide who is rational and who is irrational. It is true that Iran has not started any war for at least 150 years. And the Iranians, like anybody else, they are not crazy. They will see what is in their best interest and try to do it. And if Iran makes a bomb, and this is not proven in any way, they are not likely to use it, because one or two bombs will not be a threat to Israel or to United States. Israel has more than 200 nuclear weapons. The Iranians know their limits, and the Iranians will not attack Israel. Also, the foreign minister of Britain talked about if Iran makes a bomb, Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and other countries might try to do the same. This is also wrong, because Egypt is in no position to make the bomb now after Arab Spring. Saudi Arabia does not have the infrastructure, so there is a lot of misunderstanding, misleading statements about Iran and if Iran makes a bomb.
Okay, Gilbert, what do you think?
Gentlemen, we're overlooking the
Gilbert, go right ahead in
room.
Brussels. Go ahead.
Nobody has said a word about Israel, and it's quite remarkable that Patrick was speaking extremely reasonably about the dangers of proliferation without mentioning the fact that there already is a nuclear power in the region. But I have in front of me the last issue of Foreign Affairs magazine, which has a title which speaks for itself. This is Time to Attack Iran. Coming from the single most authoritative journal of the U.S. foreign policy community that sums up the overwhelming position of that community. And yet at the same time, in the online edition of Foreign Affairs, we do see heterodox views which dispute that, and which suggest that, even a nuclear Iran could be acceptable and could be worked with. The issue that I want to bring out is a debate in the United States foreign policy community is along one line only, and that is, can we do it? It is based on efficacy. It ignores totally the question of should we do it, or what would the consequences be of doing it, trying to take out a nuclear capability of Iran.
What do you think about that, Patrick? I mean, one of the things that we've seen, we have a disaster in Iraq, we have a quagmire in Afghanistan, and Libya is a mess. I mean, when is the law of unintended consequences going to be taken into consideration? Okay, strike Iran. What are the implications? Is it going to be clean, easy? What do you think?
Well, what we have seen is the Israelis been using covert assassinations and cyber war against Iran, and it's slowed down Iran's nuclear program. So we've
I'd like to remind my viewers, Patrick, I'd like to remind my viewers that Iran has the right to develop nuclear power for civilian use. It has a right to a nuclear program. And we have to remember that.
As it lives up to its obligations.
Go ahead.
It has its rights come with obligations. It has rights and responsibilities. It only can exercise those rights within the framework of its responsibilities under the international treaties it signed. And it's precisely that's the problem, is Iran wants to have the rights without the responsibilities of being open and transparent to the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors. That's why the international community, including the Russian government, have repeatedly voted for sanctions on Iran. Rights come with responsibilities. And because Iran has been irrational about not living up to its responsibilities, there is concern that Iran will be irrational again if it gets to have nuclear weapons. And that's why there is a lot of concern about what would happen if Iran got these nuclear weapons. The unintended consequences of a nuclear-armed Iran are, in many people's minds, much worse than the unintended consequences that could come from attacking Iran if it refuses to have a diplomatic compromise. The diplomatic compromise being offered Iran is quite effective.
Okay, Gawdat, I was going to go to you because, Iran's certainly not a threat to the United States. Okay, it's Israel that wants the attack here. So if the United States and Israel are involved in attacking Iran, how does that serve American foreign policy interests, its geopolitical interests? I see only downside. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this will not serve American interests, and there is great concern among American officials that Israel will start war, especially before the elections, when the administration can do very little, and then United States will be in the position to end the war, will have no other option but to end the war. United States does not want to start another war with another Muslim country in the Middle East. And instead of talking about war, there are other options: engaging Iran, accepting its Islamic revolution, and doing business with Iran, considering Iran like any other country, and just invest in Iran, do trade with Iran. This probably will have better options than war.
Okay, Gilbert, what do you think about that? Because it really does get down to the Israeli angle here. The Israelis want to maintain their regional supremacy here, and any country that challenges that is going to be deemed a threat, demonized, it's the new Hitler, etc., etc.
Yes, but the American involvement in an anti-Iranian agenda predates the nuclear issue by far. We date this all the way back to the origins of the Iranian Revolution. And the United States was actively conducting economic warfare against Iran in the 1990s, well before there was any hint of a nuclear threat. So what we're looking at today is an acute stage of an issue that has a long chronic history behind it. Is this a rational policy? I believe it's emblematic of U.S. foreign policy insofar as it does not correspond to the interests of America as a country. It corresponds to the interests of a foreign policy community, which is extremely self-important.
Okay, Patrick, what do you think about that? I mean, again, why is the United States so obsessed with Iran? Because it goes back to the revolution, doesn't it? I mean, we've seen a souring. Just as Gilbert pointed out. I mean, it was the United States was helping Iran develop nuclear power.
China has voted repeatedly in favor of sanctions. China and Russia have voted repeatedly in favor of sanctions against Iran at the United Nations.
But Patrick, are they? But they're not part of this. But they're not part of this discussion of attacking Iran. That's a very different agenda. It's a very different conversation.
About what to do. It's the conversation about Iran's nuclear program. You're the one who thinks there's not a problem. The Russian and Chinese governments disagree with you. They think there's a problem here.
But going to war is a different. No one has ever at the United Nations Security Council discussed going to war with Iran. Not once, ever.
You keep talking about there's no problem with the Iranian nuclear program. The Russian and Chinese governments see a problem. There's a reason why the international community as a whole sees a problem with the Iranian nuclear program. It has to do with the interest of the international community in stopping proliferation.
But at the same time, they're not promoting a war agenda against Iran. That's a very different conversation.
If I may,
go ahead, Gawdat, jump in. Go ahead.
Agenda.
Yeah, we are talking about Iran. As American citizen, I would feel less threatened if Iran has a bomb than Pakistan with a bomb. Pakistan is becoming very much close to failed state. The Iranians, at least the government is in charge. And again, comparing Iran and Pakistan, nuclear Iran will be less a threat than nuclear Pakistan.
Okay, Gilbert, do you think that the double standards have been applied here when it comes to proliferation? Because again, there is a country in the Middle East that has up to 200 nuclear warheads, and that's Israel, and it's never been inspected by the IAEA, and it doesn't even admit to having a program.
Well, hypocrisy is the small change of diplomacy, so I don't think it's particularly shocking to see hypocrisy here. Yes, there are double standards. That's patently true.
Okay, Patrick, what do you think about that? Why don't we just have a nuclear-free Middle East? Everybody signs up to it, all countries.
Why not a nuclear-free world? Why doesn't Russia give up its nuclear weapons?
Let's start somewhere.
If Russia would give up its nuclear weapons, why not? Let's start with Russia. Why not start with Russia? If you want to
start with the United States. Let's start with the United States.
Fine. That's Mr. Obama's objective. Okay. That's why he's proposing unilateral cuts in U.S. nuclear arsenals. Mr. Obama has been opposed to proliferation everywhere, and he wants to move towards nuclear zero, as it's called, getting rid of nuclear weapons. That's one of the reasons he's so opposed to proliferation, is he would like to see the world move away from nuclear weapons. And I agree that there's a double standard. 8 countries have nuclear weapons, and those countries should move towards nuclear zero. It's going to be a long, slow process, but let's move in that direction together as a group. Meanwhile, let's reinforce our efforts against proliferation. That's why the focus on Iran, because of the concern about proliferation.
Okay, Gawdat, I'm going to give you the last word on this program. What's next?
Thank you. I believe I agree that there is double standard, and it is racist to assume that the Israelis, the Americans, the British, the French are more rational than the Arabs and the Iranians. Israel will not be secure unless it is accepted by its neighbors. More nuclear weapons, more arms are not the right way to make peace. The right way is for people to do business together, live together, learn from each other, and stop fighting, stop arms races.
Well, unfortunately, it looks like the drumbeat to war will continue. Many thanks to my guests today in Washington, Montreal, and in Brussels. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.